Are you one of those people who see the glass as half empty or half full? When we look at what we have, we determine if what we have is enough or not enough. We spend our entire life trying to get enough. Enough is bills paid, good food, nice clothes, a house, a car, a cell phone. But what if, instead of aiming for enough, we are thankful for what we have? Because enough can become nothing in an instant. Being thankful for a little opens up your eyes to how much you really have. It also opens up your eyes to how little others have. But if you are generous with what you have, you will always have enough. Because when you pour into others, God will pour into you. So why aim for enough when you can overflow? Overflow by mastering your heart.
Well, good morning. Welcome to Ridgeline, everyone. So I know that Bessie had mentioned that whatever could go wrong this morning did go wrong. And so I'd like to give a shout out to every single person that helped set up this morning. All of our volunteers were amazing. We overcame some pretty substantial obstacles, at least in my mind. With Pastor Nathan being away on a pastor's retreat, I've got the stick this morning. And so I was a little nervous coming in here today. So just be patient, extend me a little bit of grace. I'd really appreciate that. So for those of you that don't know, we are concluding our series entitled Viewer's Choice. And this was from our series called Mastering Your Heart. My name is Kalen Dunn, and I am the assistant to the regional pastor. For those of you that are fans of The Office, you'll understand that quote or that title. Those of you that aren't, then I guess you won't understand it. But I've recently stepped into a kind of a new role here at the church. It's not really an associate pastor, it's an associate pastor type role. At least that's what Nathan told me. And so I was previously the outreach and discipleship team lead. Can you next slide, please? Anyone here watch college football yesterday? Or better yet, anybody like me and my wife, we both just kind of sat around and watched college football all day? No? It was glorious. It was amazing. Any Oregon fans in the house? No one's perfect. It's okay. So yeah, like I said, we're concluding our series entitled Viewer's Choice. And this week we're going to take a look at a message from the series entitled Mastering Your Heart, and it's about generosity. Now, have you ever looked at someone else and the way that they spend their money and thought bad about the way that they do it or the way they spend their money? Maybe you're here today and you're a teen and you're asking yourself the question, why do they get to drive that fancy car and I only get to drive this beater car to school? Or maybe you're here today and you're a young adult and you're saying, man, I sure wish my parents could have afforded to pay for my college tuition. Or maybe you're here today and you're married and you're saying, you're looking at your neighbor's house and you're looking at their car, their boat, and all the possessions that they have, and you're like, man, I wish we could afford to pay for stuff like the Johnsons could. Or maybe you're here today, or maybe you're at church and you're saying, I wish our church could afford that brand new state-of-the-art building, like the church down the road. Now, as I wrote this message, I learned something about generosity. Do you mind if I share it with you this morning? All right, here's what I learned. Generosity is not something we should require of others. It's something we should require of ourselves. I'm not responsible for your generosity. I'm responsible for my own. So I have a question for you to ask yourself this morning. Am I generous or am I selfish? Which one has the upper hand of control in my life? Now, in week one of the series, we learned that, or in the series, Mastering Your Heart, not Viewer's Choice. In the week one of the series, Mastering Your Heart, we talked about selfishness being the default setting of the human heart. All right, that's just who we are as a result of the fall of man. And as we get older, we learn to disguise it. We even learn to dress it up and make ourselves sound morally superior. For example, you could say, I don't know how anyone with any moral conscience could drive that type of car to school, or wear those type of clothes to school, or something along those lines. They could have done a lot of good. They could have used that money and gave it to the poor, done a lot of good with that money that they used on that frivolous possession. Now, what that really is selfishness and jealousy dressed up as moral superiority. Now, most of us outgrow that childish selfishness, but what we don't always outgrow is the selfishness of the way we look at other people and find faults in the way that they handle their possessions or their wealth or their finances, so that we can feel better about the way that we handle our possessions and our wealth and our finances, what we have. There's a story in the New Testament, and it's with Jesus and his disciples, and where we actually see this kind of thinking. And if you've ever thought this way, they really could have used that money for better or for good or to help the poor. If you've ever thought that way, when I tell you the story, and then you see who in the story was thinking that way, you're probably not going to like it. But it's okay, because that's what this is all about. That's why I asked you the question of, am I generous? Because if you don't like the answer when you're looking in the mirror and reflecting on your actions and your thoughts and your words, then you have a chance to change it starting today, and that's exciting. Now, in the story, you're going to see two different types of hearts where Jesus is addressing that jealousy, all right, and moral superiority that lives in us all, unless you've dealt with that in your life. Ultimately, there are two different types of hearts, all right? You have a generous heart and a selfish heart. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the book of John, starting in chapter 12, verse 1. Chapter 12, 1, and John reads, 6 days before Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Now, in John chapter 11, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. This miracle took place about 2 months prior to the time we're looking at now in John chapter 12, and it's 6 days before Passover and 2 weeks before the crucifixion. And then it continues in verse 2. It says, here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet. Bessie, are you listening here? Poured it on Jesus' feet, all right, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now, this verse makes me ask the question, why did Mary give such an extravagant gift? Was it possibly because she knew the value of a really good pedicure? I don't think so. Thanks. Anyway, it was an extravagant gift. And I'll go over just how extravagant it was here in the next couple of verses 4 and 5. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected, why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. Now, as I said previously, this was a very large and very extravagant gift. So large and so extravagant that John tells us it was worth a year's salary. Now, when we talk about money and its value, it's all relative depending on who we talk to, right? So if you ask me about the value of money as, say, opposed to a millionaire, they're going to be a little bit different, right? A lot of money to me is almost certainly not a lot of money to a millionaire. And the last time I checked, the Air Force doesn't employ millionaires. So, however, no matter who you are, a year's wage is a year's wage, right? Or a year's wages is a year's wage. To better understand the magnitude of this gift, I want everybody to imagine your year's wages, like your own personal finances, your income. And imagine your year's wages just gone, spent on one bottle of perfume. Just one bottle. And then you take that bottle and you dump it on someone's feet. You'll never get that perfume back, and you'll never get that money back. What an extraordinary act of extravagance. Which begs the question, why would she do that? Why would she take the equivalent of a year's wages and dump it on someone's feet? Now, of course, Judas objects, right? And if you've never read the story, you might be thinking to yourself that Judas' argument sounded valid. You might have said, yeah, that's a lot of money. And she just wasted it on Jesus' feet. Why wasn't that sold and given to the poor? That could have done so much good. And if you've ever said something like that about a person, or maybe about an organization, or maybe a church that built a brand new state-of-the-art building, if you've ever said something along those lines, that's just selfishness in disguise. Because selfishness by nature cares about nothing and no one. A selfish person will sell his or her own friends out to get what to get what they want. A selfish person will always find a good reason to not be generous. Now, how do we know this about Judas? Let's take a look at verse 6. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to whatever was put into it. Here's why this story is amazing. Because you have such a graphic contrast of the two hearts that we spoke about earlier, all in one story. The heart of Mary, who has the heart of generosity, and the heart of Judas, who has the heart of selfishness. Which leads me to my next question is, why did it bother Judas so much? What Mary did? Because he had a bad experience, maybe? I don't know. But it bothered Judas, right? Why was he so concerned about it? Why was he so upset? It wasn't his money. It wasn't his perfume. What it does, though, is it highlights this one truth. Wherever you find generosity, you'll also find selfishness. You'll always find a battle of selfishness where there is generosity, all right? There was an incredible battle of selfishness at work in Judas' heart. He didn't care about the poor because he was a thief. He pretended to be thinking about others when in reality he was only thinking of himself. Selfishness views Mary's act of extravagance, of sacrificial worship or generosity as a waste, all right? That's what selfishness does. It tries to shift the focus of the one who is selfish and put it on to the extravagance of other people. Selfishness drives by nice houses and condemns the ones who live there, the ones who are blessed with that possession. Now, it doesn't have to be a house, whatever it may be for your case. It could be, your neighbor's boat or their lawn or their lawnmower. I want to ride a lawnmower. I don't know about you, but, half an acre is a lot. So, and that's why you're here, and you may be looking in the mirror and not liking what you see, all right? We can't continue to point fingers at someone's extravagance to cover up our own selfishness. Now, there are two principles that I want us to understand from this passage of Scripture. All right, principle number one is the enemy of generosity is selfishness. And the principle two, selfishness comes, principle two is the enemy of selfishness is extravagant generosity. All right? Not just generosity, but extravagant generosity. If you want to defeat selfishness in your life, be extravagantly generous. Robert Morris talks about this in his book, The Blessed Life. All right, there's 3 levels of giving, and here's what Robert Morris has to say about it.
Now, there are 3 levels, by the way, of giving in the Bible. Tithes, offerings, and extravagant offerings. And I can show you just about any offering in the Bible, and it's either a tithe, it's an offering, or it's an extravagant offering. Lots of extravagant offerings in the Bible. David gave $21 billion to the temple. That's not bad. Even for a king, that's not bad. Here's an extravagant offering. The widow gave 2 mites. And Jesus said she gave more than all. Solomon offered us 1,000 sacrifices, all sorts of extravagant offerings in the Bible. So tithes, offerings, extravagant offerings. When I saw this, I called Steve Doolin, one of our elders and a good friend of mine, because I was just so excited. And I said, did you know there are 3 levels of giving in the Bible? He said, yeah. I said, oh, you don't either. See, you need to understand something. When a pastor finds something in the Bible, he thinks no one else has ever seen it before. I said, you don't know what they are. He said, yes, I do. I said, all right, name them. He said, tithes, offerings, and painful offerings. I said, well, that's close enough. Do you realize that most Christians, according to the statistics, never get to the first level? The latest poll shows that of all Christians, do you know how many tithe? And let me explain again what tithing is. Tithing is 10% of your gross income, not your net. It's 10% of your gross, and it's undesignated to the church where you attend, to the church where you're fed, okay? Please hear me. It's not 5% here and 3% here or 2% here. It's not, it's 10% and it's undesignated. The reason it's undesignated is because it's not yours. People love to designate their gifts. You want to know why? Because we like control with our money. Pastor, if I give a big gift, can I have an appointment with you? No. No. You can't control with your money. It's amazing how many people have tried that. That's amazing to me. Now, there are 3 levels, by the way, of giving in the Bible. Tithes, offerings, and extravagant offerings.
So he says there's 3 levels of giving, or 3 types of giving, all right? And the 3 types of giving, all right, the 3 levels are tithes, offerings, and extravagant offerings, or as he says, painful offerings. What's astounding to me is how many Christians or Christ followers struggle with this. What's even more astounding is how many believers or Christ followers think that they are tithing when they're really not. As a result, they will never make it to level 2 or 3 on this list. And as a result, they'll never experience joy or freedom or generosity at a higher level. Here's what I find interesting. Once you make it to level 1, and the key to this is making it to level 1 is not to collect tickets, all right? And when I say collecting tickets, I mean a lot of Christ followers think that, you know, if you go to church, you get a ticket. If you read your Bible, you get a ticket. If you tithe, you get a ticket. You know, if you pray, you get a ticket. It's not reaching level 1 just to collect tickets. It's reaching level 1 with your heart in the right place. It's inevitable that once you make it to level 1, you're going to reach level 2. And once you reach level 2, you're going to make it to level 3. But what we don't always do, it. And why? Why don't we always do it? Because the enemy of generosity is selfishness, and we're afraid. But let me tell you what happens when you get past that first level and God begins to speak to you about an extravagant offering or an extravagant gift. The first step in an extravagant gift is hearing from God. It's nearly impossible to give extravagantly out of your own thinking or your own power, because that's not who we are. That's not how we're wired, right? The default setting of the human heart is selfishness because it's a result of the fall of man, right? God is always speaking to us, but it's not always easy to hear him. But if you listen close and listen hard, you'll hear him, I promise you. The second step on your is excitement. Once you hear from God about a significant gift, you get excited because you get to do something different. You get to do something incredible, and it's risky, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. All right? But that excitement almost always leads to the next stage, which is fear. That's when you start having thoughts like, we can't give that much. Do you really think that God said give that much? Like that much? That many zeros? You know, right? Like you're like, this is insane. But if you take a step back, a lot of being a Christ follower is insane, right? Like we actually believe that someone was raised from the dead. It seems crazy, but after stage 3 comes stage 4, which is logic. Here you start to think about alternate plans. Do you think that Mary had to deal with logic before she poured out an entire bottle of nard, or the equivalent of a year's wages, on Jesus' feet? Of course she did, right? You don't think she said to herself, well, I just went and sold some of this to the poor, or sold some of this, I could give some of this to the poor? She absolutely thought something like that. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be logical, because you absolutely should. But if it came down to listening to God's word or his voice and being logical, we should always pick God's voice, right? And the next step is doubt. Or the next stage is doubt. Doubt tells us things Like, was that really God, or was I hearing things? You want to know how you can tell if it's really you or God? If by default we're selfish in nature, you're not gonna think up on your own to give to a church or give away an extravagant gift, right? That's not who we are. If you get a thought like that, it's probably not coming from you, it's coming from God. And the last stage is faith. Once you get past the doubt on your way to giving an extravagant gift, you move into faith. Here the excitement returns and you begin to obey. Now remember, the enemy of generosity is selfishness. And if you want to beat selfishness, you've got to move to this place of faith and putting your trust in God. We as a staff here at Ridgeline have a vision for our church. We want to love on Asheville in a way that the city has never experienced before. That the people of Asheville have never seen or heard of a church like Ridgeline, and our unconditional love for them. That regardless of what you look like, what you smell like, what you did last night, what you've done, what you did before you walked through the doors, or what you're addicted to, what your finances look like, that we love you, just as Christ loves you. We want to give to this city extravagantly. We are called to be a generous church for the sake of Christ. And you have an opportunity to be a part of that. I believe we are called to be a church entrusted with true riches, which is people who are far from God. Because he can trust us with worldly wealth. Because Ridgeline is only a little over 2 years old, it took generosity from other people at other churches for Ridgeline to be where it is today. Through extravagant offerings from others at other churches, we have a church home today. Ridgeline has some great stories. Here's one you may not know. One of our members here had a pretty huge bombshell dropped on them in 2013. When his wife at the time came up to him and told him that she wanted a divorce, as she had been sleeping with 2 other men, and she no longer wanted to be married to him. In 2009, they lived in San Antonio, Texas, where all this took place a few short years before that. They went through spells of following Christ, but they also went through spells of heavy drinking. Now, I'm not saying that drinking is bad, because it's not, but in the amount that they were drinking, it is bad. So, they were partying every weekend, right, with their friends, and this went on for a few years until 2013, when she initially told them of the divorce, or of the affairs. She said that she was sleeping with 2 other men, and she wanted a divorce. So that night, he did what he always did, and he drank. He got really, really drunk. He stayed at his boss's house, and he just sat and drank all night. He called up his buddy that night, who was the worship leader at a church that he and his wife had attended from time to time. And his worship leader buddy told him about a men's retreat that was happening at their church the next night and the following morning, and that he really wanted him to be there. And so he went. So at the morning session that he was at, he got a phone call from his wife, and his wife was hysterical, like crying hysterically. So she said to him, "I need you to come home and take care of our daughter." So he went home as she requested. Drove home to find his wife sobbing unconditionally on the couch. When she was finally able to speak, she told him about the 3rd man that she had been sleeping with. You see, the 3rd man told her to break it off with the other 2 men and her husband so that they could be together. He told her to break off all forms of communication with the other two men. And when he found out that she didn't, he broke it off with her. So the wife broke it off with the husband and the other two men, and then the third man broke it off with the wife. So at this point, she had absolutely no one, and she was devastated. So he looked at this woman just sobbing uncontrollably in front of him on the couch, and he just felt this overwhelming sense of pity and sorrow for her. Now, he still loved her because love is a choice or a decision. It's not a feeling. Decisions lead, feelings follow. So he took her in his arms, and he told her that he loved her and he wanted to make their marriage work if she was still willing to give it a try. So they did. They went to a Christian family therapist, and they spent their life savings trying to save their marriage. Now, a year later, his wife and his daughter were away at a wedding, and they had been gone for a month, or they were going to be gone for a month. So whenever his wife and his daughter went away for any length of time, he would indulge in drinking. Even on weeknights, he would drink just enough to get a good buzz going, but not be drunk enough to not go to work the next day. So that's what he did for a month straight, was he drank. And when his family returned, he just felt like something was off, something was wrong. So obviously he had some trust issues at this point, and he did the only thing he knew to do, which was do some investigating and some snooping and try to figure out what was wrong. So he looked through her phone records, and there were calls and late night texts on her phone records that weren't on her phone anymore. So he confronted her about it. She told him that her and the best man of the wedding that they had gone to were playing a prank on the groom. But he didn't buy it. He asked why she had deleted the texts and the phone calls, and she said that she didn't want him to get the wrong impression. It's too late, right? The damage had already been done. So they got in an argument and slept in separate beds that night. And when they woke up the next morning, she came out and she told him that she wanted a divorce again. She said she gave it a year and she still didn't love him, as she hadn't loved him for many years. She saw him as more of a roommate and a friend than a husband. Now, after pleading with her and begging her to stay, he eventually saw that it was useless. So what did he do? He did what he always did. He drank. He went to the gas station and got beer. And he drank. And he drank. And he drank. Now, this was in June of 2014. And his wife and daughter got on an airplane and left that July. And he drank from the time he got home from work until the time he went to sleep during all of that time. One of his biggest regrets was not spending those last few precious moments, weeks, with his daughter. He would have rather drowned his feelings in alcohol than spend his time with his daughter. See, it was like a switch flipped in his head. He couldn't see past his own depression. Feelings of sorrow and self-pity. So there he was, abandoned and betrayed, alone and hurting, completely depressed. He didn't know who he was anymore. So he drank to cover the pain and fill the gap that was left in his life. He drank every day for the next year and a half. He had a minimum of 4 to 6 drinks a day, and on the weekends, he drank from the time he woke up until the time he went to sleep or passed out. He didn't go anywhere. He just sat in his house and drank. Until the morning of October 18th, 2015. He woke up on a Monday morning after drinking 2.5 liters of vodka and a 12-pack of beer over the course of 3 days. He woke up shaking and trembling. He remembers thinking to himself, this is how you're going to kill yourself. This is how you're going to die unless you stop and get help. So we went to a pastor for help, and the pastor helped lead him to a 28-day inpatient rehab facility. So he went back to his normal life, started going to AA meetings, was sober for almost a year. Now he moved to Asheville in September of 2016. And then in October of 2016, he had a few more days to go before he reached his 1 year sober point. And he started thinking to himself, maybe you're not an alcoholic. Maybe you were just really depressed and you can drink responsibly this time. So he went back to drinking and he picked up right where he left off. Now, before he came to Asheville, he went home to visit his pastor buddy in his hometown. And his pastor was also his youth leader. And every time he goes home, he usually has breakfast with his friend. And at one of these breakfasts, his friend just looks at him and he can just tell that he's suffering and he's hurting. He sees it in his eyes. And he looks at him and he tells him, I see that you're hurting, man. God just wants you to know that it's okay to not be okay. But it's not okay to stay there. Now, he'd seen ads for Ridgeline on Facebook before he even started coming here. And eventually he came. His first service was the New Year's service of 2017, I believe. And he came to one or maybe two more services before he asked Pastor Nathan out to coffee. And they met up for coffee, and shortly into their meeting, he just opened up to Pastor Nathan. He just told him everything. He was just hoping for something that Nathan had that could fix him, that could take away his pain, fill the void in his heart. You know what Nathan told him? He said it's okay to not be okay. It's not okay to stay there. It was in that moment that he realized that Ridgeline was his home. That this is where he was supposed to be. It was in that moment that I realized this was my church home. Because this is my story. And I'm that guy. Coming to Asheville in itself was a complete miracle. There was no way that I should have been assigned to Asheville. But here I am. And I have two pastors in the course of a couple of months tell me the exact same thing on opposite sides of the country. It's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay there. Now, Pastor Nathan and Crystal, they walked me through quitting drinking. You see, I had gone to AA and I even led AA meetings, but I could never really get on board with what they had to say. See, I believe in the healing power of Jesus Christ. And I identify as a child of the living Christ, not as an alcoholic, like they do in AA. Hi, my name is Kaylin, and I'm an alcoholic, versus hi, my name is Kaylin, and I'm a child. I'm a child of the living Christ. Which one would you rather identify as? Over the last year, my life has done a complete 180. I've been brought on as staff here at Ridgeline. I've been sober for over a year. And I have zero desire to drink. Even in the midst of all the stress that life has to offer, I have zero desire to drink. And I've got an amazing wife who loves me. She knows all the worst things about me, but she still loves me and accepts me. As I said before, Ridgeline is here as a result of the generosity of others. My story and my testimony is what it is as the result of the generosity of other people at other churches who are willing to give extravagantly with their offerings in order to launch Ridgeline. And it's also a result of those of you here today that trust God with the 10% that is rightfully His, and that He would bless the 90% that He allows you to keep. But in order for any of this to come to fruition, in order for us to become that church that the city has never seen the likes of before, we have to take a look in the mirror and ask ourselves the hard question: am I willing to make the sacrifice so we can be that kind of church? Am I generous or am I selfish? Which one has the upper hand and control in my life? We need your help in this effort. If you don't like the answer, today is your opportunity to change that. Am I generous or am I selfish? Which one controls my life? The enemy of generosity is selfishness. If you want to be generous, you have to choose in your heart to be generous. Take those steps that I talked about. Hear from God. Work through the excitement, the fear. Ignore the logic and the doubt. And come to that place of faith. Come to that place of faith where you believe God will do what He says and what He promises to do, which is far above and beyond anything that we could ever imagine and do in ourselves on our own accord. You want to know why Mary gave such an extravagant gift? Because in one chapter earlier, in John chapter 11, Jesus raised her and her sister Martha's brother Lazarus from the dead. You think that's changed her perspective just a little bit? After that, she had no problem giving her most prized possession in this world, other than her life, to Jesus. It's all about our perspective. And I'm going to leave you with one last example of extravagant giving. About 2 weeks after this, not far down the road, God Himself offered His best. His only blameless Son as a sacrifice for our freedom and our lives. That's what I call extravagant. That's what I call a painful offering. See, God is the ultimate extravagant giver, and He wants to do a work in our hearts that makes us more like Him. So ask yourself again, am I generous or am I selfish? Which one controls my life? How much of God do you want? How much of you have you given up to God? It's not what we want from you here at Ridgeline, it's what we want for you. You're going to hear us say that over and over again. It's not what we want from you, it's what we want for you. God wants to make you generous. And the only way you can defeat selfishness is by becoming generous, like Mary, like God, like Jesus Himself. Remember, the enemy of generosity, or of selfishness, is generosity. Now imagine being generous. Imagine having generosity control your life. Imagine handing over control to God. So may you be blessed with a heart for our city. May you never forget where you came from. Someone else was generous so that you and I could be here today. May you be blessed with a heart of generosity that can only come from God. Let's pray. Father God, Lord, I just lift this day up to you. Father, we thank you so much for being an extravagant giver, for sacrificing your Son so that we could sit here. Father, I pray that you do a work in our hearts. Start with me, Father. Make me more generous. Break my heart for what breaks yours, Father. Break my heart for Asheville. Father, I pray that as we leave here today, that you guard and protect our hearts and minds. And make us more like you, Father. We pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.